to be here tonight and honored to be able to address each of you. Each of us have had a very unique journey to this day and this very moment in time. Each of us have faced challenges that we never expected, much less imagined. I'm honored to share a little bit of my journey and what I have learned from the challenges that I have experienced. I'm kind of a transplant into this graduating class, and I would love to thank each of you for welcoming me into your classes, your discussions, and learning experiences. I began my MSW journey in the summer of 2020 during the heart of COVID, challenge number 1. I began the summer session of 22 looking forward to my final year of classes and moving into the next chapter. Little did I know that my plans were about to change on June 2nd of 2022 when my world came to a screeching halt. I had a typical work day as a family case manager at the Department of Child Services, meeting with parents and children and completing documentation. When I arrived home, I decided on some self-care wind therapy. 2 weeks prior, my husband and I had purchased a Honda Rebel motorcycle because I wanted to learn how to ride. I had acquired all the safety gear, the armored riding jacket, the riding boots, the helmet, the gloves. I was good to go. This Thursday afternoon, I decided to take a loop around the county block. I had noticed as I was going into the sun that the sun visor in my helmet and the windshield kind of skewed my view. And I thought to myself, I need to adjust something to fix that. The next thing that I remembered, it was Sunday, June 5th. I had begun regaining consciousness in the ICU. My husband told me that I had been in an accident on my bike. I pieced together that as I was coming around a curve about a mile from home, I was hit head-on by an F-550 flatbed pickup truck loaded with a tractor on the back. It happened that the paramedic on call for the county at the time was en route to a call about 2 miles from the location of my accident. He diverted to my location, so his response time was extremely minimal. Initially, I was responsive to him, but quickly lost consciousness. He intubated me on site, and I was transported to IU Ball Memorial. Upon examination, I was determined that I had a broken femur, a shattered wrist, broken rib, a punctured lung, a lacerated spleen, and a lacerated kidney. However, these injuries were completely irrelevant given the lack of brain activity. A Glasgow Coma Scale assessment was completed, and if you're not familiar with this scale, the range of scores is 3 through 15. Anything below an 8 is comatose, 3 is brain dead. I was a 4. Dr. Salviti looked at my husband and said, I don't know if I can do anything until I get in there, but I'll try. I had an acute subdural hematoma or a brain bleed, and the right side of my skull was removed to ease the pressure on my brain due to the bleeding and swelling. I'm sure the next few days were a blur for my family as I remained heavily sedated with so many unknowns. Whether or not I would pull through alive, and if so, what my recovery would look like, both cognitively and physically. My family was told that most patients in my situation are unresponsive for weeks. On day 4, Dr. Salviti gave the clearance for orthopedic surgery to repair my wrist and femur if I could remain inclined due to my head injuries. In the blur of sedation and pain medication and intubation, I still managed to communicate with my family using sign language, asking for Diet Coke. And when I was told it was Sunday, I was asking for my computer because I knew I had a discussion post due. I remember my son looking at me and shaking his head saying, no, you do not. You do not have an assignment due. You have other priorities right now. I later found out that the ICU social worker assisted my husband with contacting Dr. Slater so he could let her know of my accident and my condition. I moved from the ICU to progressive care. Then on June 15th, I was moved to the Inpatient Rehabilitation Center where I began a regimen of therapies that would continue for the next 6 months. Let me back up a minute though and paint the picture a little more clearly. So if you imagine at this point, I have a brace on my wrist with a line of stitches, and I'm not allowed to bear any weight on it. My leg is wrapped in an ACE bandage that is guarding the series of staples from the surgery for the stabilizing rod that was inserted from the knee up. And finally, the many bandages around my head, covering the nearly 30 staples plus stitches in my scalp, along with the concave form of my head from the missing piece of skull. This gave me the added benefit of wearing a helmet to protect my otherwise exposed brain. On June 28th, just 26 days after my accident, I was able to go home. I continued working with the various therapies as I processed what it really meant to have a traumatic brain injury. I was overwhelmed with the thought of returning to work, and I was petrified of what returning to school might look like. Dr. Moore and Dr. Slater helped with planning as I took incompletes for the summer of 22 while I continued to heal and returned to Ball Memorial at the end of August for a second brain surgery to replace the piece of skull that had been removed on June 2nd. In October, I began re-engaging to complete social work 613's process recording and 640's single subject research project remotely and on my own by December of that year with the help of Dr. Moore and Professor David. I then sat out of classes while I returned to work in April. I became extremely self-conscious of all the cognitive challenges that seemed new to me. I was frustrated with myself when I could not think of a word that I was trying to say, or I could not find my phone. I now recognize that that may just be the fact that I'm 50 years old, but a TBI is a really good excuse. I returned to classes in the fall of 23, joining you all in the final year of the MSW program. Ironically, that Diet Coke that I was asking for in the ICU became my empathy project, and I can now say that I have given up my 5+ bottles of Diet Coke per day, not having any since September 25th. I'm coming up on 10 month tokens. I tell you my story because through it, I have realized that I have a purpose as a social worker to help people. Through my challenges, I have often said that the best part, of being in the MSW program is that all of the faculty are social workers whose whole goal in life is to help people succeed. I want you all to realize that you also have a purpose to help people succeed, and 10 out of 10 would not recommend having a near-death experience before coming to this realization. Finally, I would like to share a few words written by Edgar Guest in 1921 that I also shared at my high school graduation many years ago. When things go wrong, as they sometimes will, when the road you're trudging seems all uphill, when the funds are low and the debts are high and you want to smile, but you have to sigh, when care is pressing you down a bit, rest if you must, but don't you quit. Success is failure turned inside out, the silver tint of the clouds of doubt. And you never can tell how close you are. It may be near when it seems so far. So stick to the fight when your heart is fit. It's when things seem worst that you must not fail.